Hi there, everybody. Today is October 29th, and as many of you may notice, the second storm of the century is occurring outside. And so rather than take the chance that anything could go wrong as far as people trying to get to campus or people having power outages or trees being down, I'm going to go ahead and cancel class for Tuesday, and I'm going to put up a notes assignment online like we have always done. Now, this may end up being something special because one, you can see that there is video, and two, you may hear my kiddo or my dog. So anything wild could happen at this point in time. He's already been instructed to keep it down, but I don't know that that may happen. You may end up hearing He-Man in the background. So be ready for anything, and I guess we just kind of roll with it. So today what we're going to be talking about is we're going to look at continuing on talking about Darwin and talking a little bit about evolution and how do we know that the Earth is changing. Wow, so I can already hear the winds picking up outside, so hopefully you won't end up seeing me with a tree through the middle of my living room. So as we all know, the Earth is constantly changing. We found shells that have been found high up in the mountains, and we know that over the Earth's course of history, forest fires have wiped out entire species of plants and animals. We have rivers that are flowing, they're carving out rock, they're creating distinct shorelines, and all kinds of different types of events happen that we know happen because we can find the fossils of those events. Now we are in a really interesting time where humans are actually changing the Earth. It used to be that the Earth was affected by things like meteors. You can think of the dinosaurs going extinct. You can think of we can find the effects of forest fires. We can find the effects of floods. We can look at all kinds of different things, but now in the time that we live in, we know that humans are changing the Earth and being a destructive force. So one of the questions that I always ask my students is, are there fossils in Ohio? So what do you think? Are there fossils in Ohio?
There are always there are fossils in dinosaur land.
In dinosaur land, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And what do those fossils tell us?
That means scientists come and pick them up. It's for the creature that ate the dinosaur that ate the real dinosaur that turned into a fossil. And all the scientists came and dug them up and found them.
That's an awesome explanation. So my kiddo knows that there are fossils, but he doesn't know if there's fossils in Ohio or not. So the answer to that is actually a resounding yes. You can Google, are there fossils in Ohio? And that may take you to a place called Paleoportal, which is a awesome website that shows you where the fossils are found in Ohio, what periods or time periods they were from, and our state fossil, which looks like a trilobite, but I guess it's Isotalius, and it was estimated to be 71 centimeters tall. Oh, I guess it is a trilobite. And it was a predator. It was a three-lobed arthropod that hunted smaller trilobites in the warm, shallow seas.
Dinosaur.
So, yes, it would be a dinosaur. So these would be found in the ancient oceans, which is what Ohio actually used to be, an ancient ocean. So if we go back to talking about Darwin, who we've talked about a lot so far, so Darwin, one of the people that he read books about was Georges Cuvier, and Georges Cuvier was one of the first people to explore the bottoms of coal and slate mines, and he found fossils of organisms that he knew didn't exist anymore. So we've got our mastodon, a giant ground sloth, an Irish elk, and you have to remember that at that time, the people in England didn't believe that anything ever went extinct. They thought that that all organisms had been placed on Earth exactly as we found them now. So why were fossils such a problem for people at the time? Because fossils were proof that something happened that they didn't think happened. So it was a highly troubling time for people. And so if you were to Google something like what kind of animals have recently gone extinct, you could see some of the pictures of organisms that we have pictures of that are no longer found here on Earth because they have gone extinct. And there's dinosaurs, yes, that's true. Dinosaurs have gone extinct. So as far as extinctions go, there have been 5 mass extinctions on Earth, and 4 of them happened in the last 3.5 billion years. So many species have disappeared in a relatively short geologic time. 250 million years ago was a period called the Great Dying, when it's estimated that 90% of all species that existed at the time went extinct. And so most extinctions, as we know, have happened naturally without any human intervention, because the humans, as they are known, have only been around for about 1 million years, I believe. It is estimated that 99.9% of all the species that have ever existed are now extinct. So our friend Darwin, as he is out sailing from London and being on a naturalist voyage as he headed out on the MS Beagle, he found that he actually hated sea travel. And so he was really upset by living on a boat. He was sick most of the time that he was gone. So whenever the boat would pull up on the shore, he would spend as much time as possible on shore looking around. He collected fossils and specimens to bring them back to England.
Like dinosaurs.
Like dinosaurs. I don't think Darwin found any dinosaurs.
They are in dinosaur land.
They are in dinosaur land. So he collected these specimens and brought them back to England. It says he felt like he was on a permanent vacation, but I find that hard to believe, because if he hated sea travel, that doesn't necessarily sound like fun. So in Darwin's voyage around the world, he started off in London, England. Then he traveled here down the coast of Africa and got here to about Brazil in South America, traveled the coast of South America, down around the tip of South America, and up the coast, this separate Pacific coast of South America. And then the boat traveled off and managed to hit the Galapagos Islands. And so the Galapagos Islands are the islands that we really want to talk about here, because those are the ones where most of the information that he found out about species was actually discovered. So then he set off into the Pacific Ocean. He went around the coast of New Zealand and Australia, down through the Indian Ocean, up almost hitting the Philippines. Then he traveled back around the Cape of South Africa, back over to South America, and up to London, England. So this is quite a voyage for that time. It was actually a 5-year voyage, and I don't know if you can imagine what it would be like to be on a boat with all of the same men, and only men, for 5 years, and just eating the food that they could keep on the boat, not even refrigerated. So that would have been a really wild time. So when he got to the Galapagos Islands, he found this just lush area that had lots of different plants, lots of different birds, lots of different insects and lizards. And these islands were volcanic islands. And so there were a lot of unusual species that he would have found that he never would have saw on South America or Africa or any of those places. So, what he observed was geographic similarities and differences. So he looked at how are the different places on the coast similar to each other and different from one another. He also looked at the fossils and the living plants and animals, and he started to develop his theory of evolution. He had been... and dinosaurs. Lyell's Principles of Geology said that as the Earth changed, the organisms changed, and Darwin was starting to really think about that. And so when he was in the Galapagos Islands, he wanted to explain how could he find these marine fossils high up in the Andes Mountains, hundreds of miles off the coast, not even close to an ocean. And his idea was that the Earth is ever-changing, and that as the Earth continues to change, the species continue to change over time. So this is what the Galapagos Islands look like. It's a chain of 13 islands and a very, very short distance from one another. They are volcanic islands, meaning that as underwater volcanoes erupted off the shores of South America, eventually the lava would hit the surface and it would start to grow up, and the lava would start to spill over, and eventually, after 50 million years, we had a set of islands that became inhabited with plant and animal species that were similar to those found in South America. And dinosaurs that were similar to those in South America, and but they were distinctly different. They had distinctly changed. So if you're wondering where the coast of Ecuador is, it's right here. It's at this ocean current junction where the cold water from the Pacific is coming up with the even colder water from the Antarctic, and then we have the different currents coming through, and here you can see the tectonic plates, and how when we have those tectonic plates, that's where we have the underwater volcanoes seen in those types of chains. So this is my interesting picture, I guess. In July of 1998, I was a junior in college. I went to the Galapagos Islands in order to study the giant tortoises. And so these tortoises were so cool because some of them weighed 600 pounds. And you could have ridden on them if you had wanted to. And so we saw some of the neatest species. There's different species on every single island. And so you could actually see how being on different islands had affected the tortoises based on what type of food supply was available. So Darwin started to come up with these patterns that he started to notice. He looked at traits exhibited by species, and he looked particularly at the Galapagos Island finches. And what he found was the finches that were on South America in Ecuador looked one way, had a beak that made it so that it was possible for them to gather their food source in South America. But if you look at the Galapagos finches, notice that they look very similar. But if it's a ground finch and it's eating seeds that are on the ground, it's got a bigger, harder beak. If it's a tree finch and it's eating fruits, then it's going to have a beak that is modified so that it can get inside of the fruits. If it is a warbler finch and it eats insects, then it's going to have a long pointy beak in order to best eat those insects. So he's starting to come to these realizations about the way that nature works. And he found one species that he found to be particularly troubling. If you look at the hairy armadillo, which is running around in South America, it's a pretty small organism, but he found the fossils of a 10-foot long, it was called a glyptodont. And it had this hard, bony outer shell to it, and long, spiky tail, and it very closely resembled a giant armadillo. And so he found that traits exhibited by species changed depending on when it was that they were found, and he knew that because of fossils. Darwin brought back these finches from each of the islands, so he would catch a finch and he would label it and study it, and he kept them in pristine condition and brought them all back to the Natural History Museum in England from the Galapagos Islands. And as he began to study them, he realized that they all had similar structure, but the function of their beaks had changed depending upon their food sources. So what we know about finches is that as finches eat, they get fat and happy and have sex and have lots of baby finches. And so if you're going to catch a food source on the Galapagos Islands, here we have tree finches, and you can see that this one with the big pointed beak is going to be a fruit eater. So he's got a beak that's modified or adapted so that he can catch, well, I guess not catch, so that he can eat the fruit. Here we have our insect eaters. Notice that they have these pointy beaks for catching insects. Here we've got the set of probing beaked finches that made it so they could reach into tight holes in cactuses and get their food source out. And over here we have the seed eaters that have these big hard beaks so that they can crack the seeds and get into them. So you start to see that organisms, depending on their food source, are going to have feeding appendages that are adapted to that. So just like you looked at in your evolution lab, where you had the different forks and knives and spoons and toothpicks and the different food sources, the one that is best adapted, or at least the smartest and able to get the most food, is going to be the one that survives and gets fat and happy and has lots of pets and has lots of baby finches. And so if we look back at all of these finches, here's a pedigree of the finches. You can see that they are extremely varied. We can see their common ancestor. If we look back generation after generation after generation, eventually what we get to is the South American mainland common ancestor finch. And so as he changed into or morphed into finches that lived on the ground, some finches lived in trees, some finches are going to be warbler finches that are going to be the ones that sing. They are going to have descendants that are able to do those different qualities of things, and that will help them to survive and adapt and go on to have lots of sex and lots of baby finches. So the similarities between the fossils of extinct species and the living species in that same area were something that Darwin had to come to understand, because he was still thinking of the current religious understandings that species did not change, species did not go extinct. And so at every location he found that there were fossils and there were extinctions that were happening. And so that was something that was very troubling to him, that it took him almost 20 years in order to publish. So here you can see the Glyptodont skeleton that he brought back with him from South America. Sorry, I'm drinking my tea and trying to stay warm. So it was 10 feet long and 4,000 pounds. Obviously looks very similar to an armadillo, but it's just giant. And so this was something that was very troubling to Darwin. So another thing that Darwin had been reading at the time was Thomas Malthus, and he was an economist. He wrote a essay called The Principles of Population, and what this basically prophesized was gloom and doom for human populations, so that he believed that populations had the opportunity to grow much faster than their food supplies. So this said something about not only organisms like animals, but organisms like humans, that we have the possibility to grow much faster than our food supply. And I think every one of you knows that if we look at the situations in South America and we look at the situations in Africa, where there are people that are starving because they can't get enough food in order to survive. And so what Darwin realized at that time was that favorable variations that are able to help a species survive are the ones that are preserved. And if they don't have a favorable adaptation, if they have a mutation that's bad, then those genes are going to perish right there. And so if we look at what's happening with humans, you can see that the world population from 1750 to the predicted population in 2050. So in 1750 we had approximately 500 million people. It looks like by about 1880, we got up to 1 billion. And then you start to see in 1950, all of a sudden, the human population just exploded with growth. And so if we start to think about the things that were happening in the 1950s with technology adaptations and with the Industrial Revolution and looking at sanitation and medicine becoming so much better, we've been able to make it so that people don't die off the way that they used to. So our population has just exploded. It's gone straight up. And so basically by 2050, they predict that there will be 8.5 billion people. We know that right now in 2012, we just hit 7 billion people. So think, where are we going to fit these 2 billion people here on Earth and be able to support all of the food that they need in order to be successful? Another thing to notice about this is that we've got our developing countries versus our developed countries. Notice that in developed countries, we don't see the kind of growth curve because of, we don't see that great kind of dying off. But in developing countries, we see this huge explosion of people that as medicines are keeping them healthy, the populations are just beginning to explode. So in 1858, Darwin finally published his thoughts on natural selection. And like I said, he had waited a really, really long time in order to do this. He felt like there were some religious reasons that he didn't want to put this idea out, even though he felt pretty sure he was right, and even though he had talked to many of his peers and they had agreed he was right and that he should publish. He sat on these books that he had written for 20 years before he finally published them. And that's because somebody else came to the same conclusion that Darwin had come to and was about to publish his manifesto. And so if this other gentleman had published before Darwin, then Darwin wasn't going to get any of the credit for these ideas that he had. He said basically the best species would win and the unfavored species would lose. So the ones that could best survive would win, the ones that could not survive would lose and would eventually become extinct. And so before we had Darwin, it was believed that organisms were basically put on the earth by a creator all at the same time, that organisms were fixed and no additions and no subtractions happened, that the earth was about 6,000 years old and mostly unchanging. So when he first published in 1859, it took a long time for people to be able to accept Darwin's ideas. Hey, Matthew? Matthew, what did I tell you? Settle down. So some organisms have gone extinct. We know that the Earth is more than 6,000 years old, and that the geology of the Earth is not constant. Obviously, as we are watching these gigantic hurricanes coming along here on our coast, we know that the Earth is always changing, is always being affected by weather events and by climate changes and by ice ages and by a lot of different factors. And so, after putting off publishing his thoughts on natural selection for 15 years, Darwin did so after, that was the name I was looking for, Alfred Russel Wallace independently came up with the same idea. So they published a joint presentation initially in 1858, and then Darwin published a much more extensive version of called The Origin of Species in 1859. So he sparked this wide debate, a lot of criticism of him. People were very upset about this book, and so this is Alfred Russel Wallace. This is the guy who was about to publish the same ideas as Darwin, and so if he had actually done that, it could have been all along that we remembered Wallace's name and not Darwin's name. So if we look at a question like this, which may be coming up on your exam, which idea did not support the observations that Darwin made during his trip on the HMS Beagle? Did he have the observation that the Earth was shaped by gradual forces, that species are fixed and unchanging, that the Earth is older than 6,000 years, or that populations could grow beyond the ability of the environment to support them? And so the idea that was not supported for Darwin was number 2, There was Aristotle did not come into play here. And so a lot of people ask, well, this evolution, it's only a theory. It's Darwin's theory. It's actually the most well-studied phenomenon in all of science. There are 170 different journals devoted to just evolution and the different types of evolution. So if you can look at this a little bit better, we talk about brain behavior, we talk about development, human behavior, education and outreach, psychological, genetic selection, genome biology, human evolution, infection, insects. There's an Israeli journal, there's the International Journal, there's zoology, human evolution, mammalian evolution. The list just goes on. And evolution is actually one of the most widely studied and most widely accepted ideas in all of science. And so if we're going to look at some of the mechanisms that give rise to evolution, we need to understand a little bit about how it works. How do scientists go out there and understand what's going on? Hey, son? Son, sit, please. Thank you. Okay. So 4 mechanisms can give rise to evolution. The first of them is when we have allele frequencies in a population that change. So what that basically means is, let's say we look at a group of tigers, and in the tiger population we've got some of the tigers that are orange, but some of the tigers that are white. So if you look at the allele frequencies, we have the proportion of orange-furred pigmented alleles in the population, and then a very tiny segment of white fur pigment alleles in the population. So obviously white tigers are something that humans have been breeding for, and they've been breeding them in zoos and breeding them in carnivals. And so if you were in charge of a large population of tigers, and you knew that the white tiger was going to bring so much more business to your zoo than the orange tiger would, you would want to try and breed for having more white tigers. And so what has actually happened is that more tigers and more white tigers and more white tigers have developed over time, and the proportion of the pigmented alleles are going to be expressed more as white fur pigmented alleles over time, until eventually, if we look at our slice of the pie, we can see we probably have 5/8 of the pie being the orange tigers, and then we have 3/8 of the pie being white tigers. And as we continue on, we may find that eventually we get to half, eventually we get to 3/4, and then we could actually breed the white fur in and breed out the orange fur, if that's what we wanted to do. So that would actually be a case of witnessing evolution. So this is an alteration in the population. We increase the white phenotype through breeding, and as far as the generations go, we have a higher proportion of white tigers. So what has happened is evolution. It's a change in the allele frequencies of the population over time. Hey, Matthew, what am I trying to do here? Okay, thank you. So if I were to ask you a question, which of the following has the shortest generation time, bacteria, mice, humans, or elephants? You should be able to guess which one breeds the fastest, and that would be bacteria. Hence why we see things like antibiotic resistance, new diseases coming along, and this is evolution in action. Because individuals do not evolve. It's not just one individual turning into something else. It's not a willful, something we can will to happen. You don't just start growing wings because you want them, or growing white fur because you want it. Populations evolve because the allele frequencies change over time. So it's helpful to think of these. Some of you who are business-minded may think of an allele as having a market share of all of the alleles. White tigers have a small market share, but it increases over time as we try and breed more and more of these white tigers. So which example below would be an example of allelic frequency? The skin of a population of Caucasian students gets darker during the summer and lighter during the winter. Yep, I have seen that happen. 1 in 25,000 Caucasians are affected by an inherited disorder called cystic fibrosis. African Americans make up 12.3% of the U.S. population in the year 2000. 2 and 3, or all of the above. So the answer is 2 and 3, because skin getting darker in the summer and lighter in the winter is not the change in the genes. That would just be a change in the amount of sun you are getting. But Caucasians affected by cystic fibrosis, African Americans making up the U.S. population, those things are examples of allelic frequency. So in looking at the different types of things that are going to affect evolutionary change, here we have 4 different agents of evolutionary change. They are mutations, they are genetic drift, migration, and natural selection. So all we're talking about here as far as evolution goes is this change in the population over time. So a mutation gives a direct change to the DNA of an individual, which is the ultimate source of all genetic variation. So mutations, as you may remember from our talk about DNA, are alterations of the base pair sequences in an individual's DNA. So when this alteration occurs in a gene, the changes in the DNA sequence may change the allele. So may change the thing that causes the traits that make an organism different and able to survive and get fat and happy and have sex and have lots of babies. So here we can look at one of the mechanisms of evolution, being mutation. So here we have a strand of DNA, and then some kind of mutagen comes along. A mutagen just being something that causes mutation. So we have our normal base pair sequence and our mutated base pair sequence. So notice that we've got our A's and T's and G's and C's, and in this one, after the mutation, it flips it. So it's not the same A's and T's and G's and C's in order anymore. So whereas we used to have a normal protein that was making up the normal phenotype of a leopard frog, here we have a mutated protein, something that is created differently because it's got a change in the DNA sequence. And so here we have a mutated frog that's got 2 extra legs. Now notice that this is not a mutation that helps a frog. Having 6 legs doesn't help you to hop around better. It's going to actually probably hinder you. So despite mutation's vital role in the generations of variation, mutations almost always cause early death and lower the reproductive success of an individual. So mutations almost always are negative. They're almost never positive. But if they are a positive thing, if having 6 legs were to help this frog to be able to survive, and he found a 6-legged friend that he could have babies with, then we could witness evolution in action. So as far as the causes for mutations go, we have when cell dividing goes awry, just like we had talked about with cancer and the cell divisions and growing out of control. We have environmental phenomena that can be mutagens. If you think about what is happening in Japan right now, where they just had the nuclear reactor breakdown in Fukushima, you know that the animals and even the people that are around that nuclear reactor meltdown are being exposed to a really strong mutagen, which would be all of the radiation that's leaking out of this nuclear reactor. So another thing that we know about mutations is that they are random. They're either beneficial or they're detrimental, and as we know, they're almost always detrimental. They're very, very seldomly beneficial. So one of the questions that we often hear in lab, because people would like to do their presentations about tanning beds, and how these tanning beds are not just ultraviolet rays that make you look more tan, but we're actually looking at ultraviolet radiation. This can cause mutations. Notice that this is not a change to the sex cells. When you have tanning, it changes the cells, but it doesn't likely change a sperm or an egg. It only changes the body cells. So it's not likely to cause a mutation that is passed along to your children. However, tanning can cause skin cancer, which is a change in your cells that causes them to grow out of control, and as they grow out of control, the cancer takes over your body. We know that mobile phones also release radiation. So if you've ever heard that you're not supposed to keep your phone right up next to your ear because it might cause brain tumors, we have actually found evidence that suggests that mobile phones may have enough radiation in them to affect our brains. And I don't think that that would be something that would be all that surprising to any of us. I think that we know that mobile phones can release radiation. So here we've got mutations as the ultimate source of genetic variation in a population. So first we could have our normal protein, then we could have our mutated protein, and when we get our mutated protein, we have a mutation in the phenotype. So nearly all mutations reduce an organism's fitness. And when we talk about fitness here, we talk about the ability to survive and pass on your genes to your offspring. So if you were to suppose that you had written a 10-page paper and you were to randomly select one letter in the paper and change it to another letter, is it more likely to make your paper better or make your paper worse? I can't think of any paper that I've ever written that if I just changed one letter, it would make my paper actually better. So another example of evolution in action is genetic drift, where we have random changes in allele frequencies in a population. So what this basically means is that we've got here an example of a gene that's neither beneficial nor detrimental to a human population. If you have a chin cleft, it's not going to affect your survival ratio. So in genetic drift, what we find is that it doesn't affect reproductive success. It's based solely on chance. So we have often these fluctuations that happen in the population that can be altered after the genetic drift takes place. So in this case, we have recessive alleles that cause this cleft chin. And then as we have fixation occurring, where genetic drift leads to fixation when an allele's frequency becomes 100% in a population. So if this occurs, there's no more chance of you to get a cleft chin, because if nobody passes along cleft chin to their offspring, then the gene isn't there anymore. The gene's not there anymore. The trait becomes extinct. So the important factor in distinguishing genetic drift from natural selection is that in genetic drift, the allele frequency is not related to reproductive success. So having a cleft chin doesn't affect whether or not you're going to be able to successfully reproduce or not. So the impact of genetic drift is often much greater in smaller populations than it would be in larger populations. Genetic drift can lead to fixation for one allele or for a gene in a population. And if this happens, there is no more variability in the population for this gene, and genetic drift reduces the genetic variation in a population. So that's where we're going to end off today. I hope that you're all safe tomorrow, and I hope that that everything comes along. Well, I already see that the hurricane has closed my son's school, so I guess I'm not coming to work tomorrow. So it actually turns out to be the perfect excuse, I guess, to hang out with my kid all day. So thank you very much. I hope you've kept up with your notes. I will put the notes up there so that you have a chance to look at them, and we will go from there. So be safe, be sane, and I will talk to you all soon.